James sat in his favorite armchair, the one with the worn leather that had molded perfectly to his shape over the years. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a steady, unchanging rhythm that had marked the passage of time in his life for decades. He had worked hard for this peace, for the comfort of his home, for the security that came with knowing he would never have to worry about money again. And yet, here he was, staring at his son across the coffee table, feeling the weight of a decision he didn't want to make. Mark had always been a bright boy, charming, quick-witted, the kind of person who could talk his way into or out of anything. But that had always been the problem. Too much charm, not enough discipline. Too many grand ideas, not enough follow-through. James had watched over the years as his son jumped from one scheme to another, always convinced that this one would be the big break, the moment everything changed. And each time, when things didn't work out, Mark had an excuse, a reason why it wasn't his fault, why he just needed a little more time, a little more money. Now, at 32, with a wife and a lifestyle he couldn't afford, Mark was sitting across from James, leaning forward with that familiar spark in his eyes. "Dad, this is different," he said, voice low and earnest. "This isn't like the other things. This is a sure thing. I've done the research, I've talked to the right people. All I need is the capital to get it off the ground." James didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, watching as Mark's confidence wavered just slightly, as his fingers tapped restlessly against his knee. Lily, Mark's wife, sat beside him, her expression carefully neutral, but James could see the calculation in her eyes. She was waiting, too. "How much?" James finally asked, though he already knew. Mark hesitated, then exhaled. $100,000. James didn't react. He had expected this. He had known, the moment Mark asked to meet, that it would be about money. It always was. "And if I say no?" Mark blinked, as if the possibility hadn't occurred to him. "Why would you say no?" James leaned back in his chair, studying his son. "Because money doesn't solve irresponsibility, Mark. Because I've given you chances before. Because I don't believe throwing more money at another one of your ideas will fix anything." Mark's face darkened. "You don't believe in me." "I don't believe in this," James corrected. "There's a difference." Lily shifted, her voice smooth but with an edge beneath it. "James, we're not asking for a handout. It's an investment. You'll get your money back with interest." James almost laughed. He had heard that before, too. "No," he said simply. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Mark's expression twisted, first disbelief, then anger. "You'd really let us struggle? Your own son?" "You're not struggling," James said. "You just want more." Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You know what? Fine. If you don't care about our future, then why should I care about yours?" Lily stood with him, her earlier politeness gone. "Come on, Mark. Let's go." James watched as they stormed out, the front door slamming behind them. The house settled back into silence, the clock ticking on as if nothing had happened. He should have felt guilty. Maybe a part of him did. But stronger than guilt was the certainty, the deep, unshakable knowledge that he had made the right choice. He just didn't know yet how wrong they were. The morning after the argument, James woke with a dull weight pressing against his chest, as though his subconscious had spent the night wrestling with the echoes of his son's accusations. "You don't care about our future." The words had burrowed under his skin, needling him with doubt. Had he been too harsh? Too quick to dismiss Mark's latest venture without even hearing the details? He rolled onto his side, staring at the empty space beside him, the bed still too large, too quiet, even after all these years without Margaret. She would have known what to say, how to smooth things over. But Margaret wasn't here. And James had never been good at smoothing things over. He pushed himself up with a grunt, the stiffness in his joints a reminder that time was not on his side. The house felt hollow as he moved through it, the usual routines, coffee, newspaper, the distant hum of the radio doing little to fill the silence. By mid-morning, the restlessness became unbearable. He needed to do something, to prove to himself that he hadn't made a mistake. Maybe if he saw Mark and Lily in their own space, away from the tension of last night's confrontation, He could gauge whether they were truly struggling or simply looking for an easy way out. The drive to their apartment was short, the route familiar. James had helped them move in 2 years ago, carrying boxes up the narrow staircase while Lily directed where everything should go with the precision of a general. The building hadn't changed much since then: peeling paint, a flickering hallway light, the faint smell of someone's overcooked dinner clinging to the air. He knocked, half expecting no answer, but the door swung open almost immediately, revealing Lily in a silk robe, her hair perfectly curled, her face caught in an expression of surprise that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. "James," she said, blinking. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," he replied. "I thought we could talk. Clear the air." She hesitated, just for a second, before stepping aside. "Mark's not here. He had an errand to run." James nodded, stepping inside. The apartment was warmer than he remembered, the air thick with the rich, earthy scent of coffee, not the cheap, bitter kind Mark used to drink straight from the pot, but something deeper, more complex. His eyes drifted to the kitchen counter, where a gleaming espresso machine sat beside a bag of beans with a label he recognized instantly: Kona Reserve. He'd only ever seen that brand in specialty shops, the price per pound enough to make even him hesitate. Lily followed his gaze, her fingers tightening around the edge of her robe. "Would you like a cup?" she asked, too casually. James didn't answer right away. He was too busy piecing together the inconsistencies: the expensive coffee, the silk robe, the way Lily's nails were freshly manicured, a deep crimson that matched the accents in the apartment. None of it fit with the image Mark had painted last night: the desperate plea for help, the implication that they were barely scraping by. "You've got an expensive taste," he said at last, nodding toward the coffee. Lily's smile was tight. "A treat. We don't indulge often." James hummed, non-committal, as he moved further into the apartment. The living room was tidy, but not in the way of people who were struggling. The throw pillows were plush, the TV larger than the one in his own house, a stack of hardcover books on the side table, recent bestsellers, the kind that cost $40 apiece. He picked one up, flipping it open to the crisp, unbroken spine. "You read a lot." "When I have time," Lily said, watching him closely. James set the book down, his mind racing. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe they had saved up for these things, sacrificed elsewhere. But then why ask him for money? Why the urgency, the insistence that they needed his help? A noise from the hallway made him turn. Mark, stepping through the door, his arms laden with shopping bags. He froze when he saw James, his expression flickering through surprise, guilt, then defiance. "Dad," he said, setting the bags down too carefully. "What are you doing here?" James didn't answer. He was too busy looking at the bags. Nordstrom, Williams-Sonoma, the kind of places he knew didn't sell anything cheap. Mark followed his gaze, his jaw tightening. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" James said, his voice dangerously calm. "What does it look like, Mark?" Lily stepped forward, her hand on Mark's arm. "We had some extra money this month. We just wanted." "Extra money?" James repeated. "From where?" The silence that followed was heavy, charged with something unspoken. Mark's eyes darted to Lily, then away, and in that moment, James knew. Whatever they were hiding, it wasn't good. And he was going to find out what it was. James left Mark and Lily's apartment with the bitter taste of betrayal clinging to the back of his throat, sharper than any coffee they could have served him. The drive home was a blur of stoplights and honking cars, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. He replayed the scene in his head: the expensive coffee, the shopping bags, the way Mark had looked at Lily like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. They weren't struggling. They were lying. But to what extent? His first call was to Rita, his older sister and the only other person in the family with both the means and the soft heart to lend money if asked. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and warm as always. "James, I was just thinking about you. Did Mark and Lily come to you for money recently?" he asked, bypassing pleasantries. The pause on the other end of the line was all the confirmation he needed. "They said it was for you," Rita admitted after a beat, her tone shifting into something uneasy. "That you were sick, some kind of treatment your insurance wouldn't cover. They made it sound urgent, so I..." "How much?" James interrupted, his stomach twisting. $50,000. James exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. $50,000. And that was just Rita. Who else had they manipulated? Over the next 2 days, James became a man possessed. He dug through old emails, made calls to cousins and family friends, even reached out to Mark's former business partners under the guise of catching up. The picture that emerged was worse than he'd imagined. Mark and Lily had been running a quiet but effective con on nearly everyone in their lives. Sob stories about medical emergencies, last-minute rent crises, even a fake investment opportunity they'd pitched to James's old college friend, Carl. The amounts varied, but the method was always the same: urgency, guilt, just enough plausibility to make refusal feel cruel. The most damning discovery came when James checked their social media, something he rarely did. There, in stark contrast to their tales of hardship, were photos of weekend getaways, dinners at upscale restaurants, Lily proudly displaying a new designer handbag in one post while Mark toasted with a bottle of champagne in another. The dates aligned perfectly with the weeks after they'd taken money from Rita. James sat back in his office chair, the glow of the computer screen casting harsh shadows across his face. This wasn't just irresponsibility. This was calculated. They'd played the family for fools, exploiting trust and generosity to fund a lifestyle they hadn't earned. And they'd done it with smiles on their faces. He closed the laptop with a quiet click, the decision settling over him like a weight. They thought they were clever. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They were wrong. The anger that had carried James through the investigation had cooled by the 4th day, hardening into something far more dangerous than patience. Revenge, he had learned over the years, was not a wildfire but a slow burn, carefully controlled to ensure maximum destruction. He spent hours at his desk, drafting and redrafting his plan, considering every possible reaction, every loophole they might exploit. It needed to be flawless. It needed to hurt. He called Mark on a Thursday evening, timing it just before dinner when people were relaxed, their guards down. The phone rang 3 times before Mark answered, his voice wary. "Dad. I've been thinking," James said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of calm. "Maybe I was too harsh the other day." A beat of silence. Then, cautiously, "Yeah? You're my son. I want to see you succeed." He let the words hang, imagining the way Mark's face would twist: confusion, hope, greed all warring for dominance. "I've got a proposal for you. Come by the house tomorrow. Bring Lily." He hung up before Mark could respond. They arrived the next evening dressed as if for a business meeting, Mark in a button-down with the sleeves rolled up, Lily in a sleek black dress that probably cost more than their monthly rent. James noted the details with detached amusement. They were trying to impress him. Good. Over coffee plain, this time, brewed from the cheap canister James kept for guests, he laid out his terms. "I'll give you $200,000. But not as a gift. As an investment." Mark's eyes lit up, but Lily was sharper. "What's the catch?" James smiled. "No catch. But I need to know you're serious. You put in $20,000 of your own money first, proof you're committed. Then the rest is yours." Mark leaned forward, already mentally spending it. "20's nothing. We can do that." Lily's fingers tightened around her cup. "When do you need it by?" 2 weeks. Her eyes flicked to Mark, a silent conversation passing between them. James pretended not to notice. After they left buzzing with excitement, already talking about office spaces and hiring, James allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd taken the bait. Now came the fun part, watching them scramble. He made a few calls that night. His banker. A friend at the credit union. By morning, every financial door Mark might try was quietly, irrevocably closed. The next 2 weeks unfolded exactly as James had anticipated, like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Mark and Lily, fueled by the promise of easy money, threw themselves into scraping together the $20,000 with a desperation that bordered on manic. They sold their designer belongings at pawn shops for fractions of their worth, their social media suddenly devoid of luxury posts. James heard through the grapevine that Mark had even approached old college friends, spinning some convoluted story about a temporary cash flow issue. The irony wasn't lost on James. His son was now lying to cover up the lies that had funded his lies in the first place. Lily, ever the pragmatist, took out high-interest payday loans, her once manicured nails now bitten down to the quick. James knew this because he'd hired a discreet investigator, a retired cop named Doyle, to keep tabs on them. Doyle's reports were thorough: the eviction notice they'd ignored for months, the maxed-out credit cards they'd been shuffling between, the way they argued in hushed, frantic tones outside the bank when they realized no one would approve them for another line of credit. On the 14th day, right on schedule, Mark called. His voice was ragged with exhaustion but buoyed by triumph. "We've got it, Dad. The 20 grand. James feigned pride. "That's my boy. Bring it by tonight." When they arrived, Mark practically vibrated with nervous energy, clutching a cashier's check like it was a winning lottery ticket. Lily hovered behind him, her smile strained at the edges. The apartment was spotless. James had made sure of it with a folder placed conspicuously on the coffee table. Mark handed over the check. "There. Now about that 200,000 inch." James examined the check, then set it down without a word. He opened the folder and slid out a stack of papers, bank statements, loan documents, screenshots of their social media posts juxtaposed with dates of their pleas for money. Mark's face went pale. "What is this?" "A reckoning," James said. Lily snatched up one of the pages, her breath quickening as she scanned it. "You've been spying on us." "I've been verifying." James leaned forward. "You stole from your family. You lied to their faces while you sipped $100 coffee. And you thought I'd just hand over more money?" Mark's hands clenched. "We paid you back. With money you stole from Rita." James stood, towering over them. "Here's what's going to happen. You return every dime you took, not just to me, to everyone. Or I file fraud charges." Lily's composure cracked. "You wouldn't." James met her gaze. "Try me." For the first time, Mark looked afraid. "Dad. Get out." They left in silence, the weight of their own greed settling around their shoulders like a noose. James picked up the check, running his thumb over the numbers. Phase 1 was complete. Now for the real punishment. The days following the confrontation in James's living room were marked by an eerie silence, the kind that settles before a storm. Mark and Lily had slunk away like chastened children, but James knew better than to mistake their quiet for surrender. People like them, people who had spent their lives manipulating and taking, didn't simply bow out when caught. They doubled down. And so James waited, the folder of evidence heavy on his desk, his phone buzzing intermittently with updates from Doyle. The first sign of their next move came 3 days later, when Rita called in a panic. Mark had shown up at her doorstep, red-eyed and trembling, spinning a new tale, this one about Lily's supposed cancer diagnosis, the urgent need for experimental treatment, the cruel misunderstanding with James that had left them stranded. Rita, bless her, had hesitated. She'd promised to think about it. That hesitation was all James needed. He acted swiftly. That evening, he drafted an email cold, precise, devoid of emotion, and attached every shred of evidence he'd gathered, the loan documents, the screenshots of their lavish purchases, the damning timestamps proving their lies. He didn't send it to Mark or Lily. He sent it to every single person they had ever taken money from, every relative, every friend, every former colleague who had ever been charmed by their smiles and emptied their wallets in sympathy. The fallout was immediate. Aunt Rita called him at dawn, her voice shaking with betrayal. Cousin Elaine sent a string of furious texts. Old family friends left voicemails, their tones ranging from bewildered to livid. By noon, Mark's phone was blowing up with notifications, not offers of help this time, but demands for repayment, threats of legal action, promises of severed ties. Lily's Instagram, once a carefully curated gallery of luxury, flooded with angry comments from people they'd swindled. James didn't stop there. He leaked the evidence to the local community board, ensuring their reputation in the neighborhood was ash. He called the editor of the alumni newsletter at Mark's alma mater a favor owed from years back and made sure their exploits were quietly mentioned in the next issue. By the end of the week, Mark and Lily were pariahs, their names synonymous with deceit. The final blow came when Doyle texted him a photo, a U-Haul parked outside their apartment building, Lily supervising as movers loaded boxes. A one-word caption, running. James allowed himself a small, grim smile. They'd thought they could outmaneuver him. They'd thought wrong. The dust settled slowly, as it always did, but James found no satisfaction in the quiet that followed the storm he'd unleashed. He had expected to feel vindicated, perhaps even smug, as he watched Mark and Lily's carefully constructed facade crumble into ruin. Instead, there was only a hollow ache, the kind that came from knowing his own son had been capable of such betrayal, and that he, James, had been the one to orchestrate its exposure. The house felt heavier these days, the silence more pronounced, as if even the walls were waiting for something he couldn't name. It was Doyle who told him about the divorce. Lily, it seemed, had reached her limit. The public humiliation, the financial ruin, the realization that Mark had no real plan beyond the next con, it had all been too much. She'd left him with nothing but a suitcase and a lawyer's number, vanishing into the kind of life that didn't leave a paper trail. Mark, suddenly alone and stripped of the person who had always been his sharpest ally, had spiraled. James found him a week later, sitting on the steps of the old public library where he'd done his homework as a boy. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved into the pockets of a jacket that had seen better days. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, his voice raw. "Did you enjoy it?" he asked. James sat beside him, the concrete cold even through his coat. "No." Mark let out a shaky breath. "Then why?" "Because someone had to stop you." James studied his son's face, the shadows under his eyes, the stubble along his jaw. "And because I hoped, maybe, you'd finally learn." For a long moment, Mark said nothing. Then, quietly, "I have." It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was a start. James reached into his pocket and slid over a business card, a friend of his, the foreman at a construction site, who was looking for reliable workers. 8 a.m. Monday, he said. "You show up on time, you do the work, you get paid. No shortcuts." Mark took the card, his fingers trembling just slightly. "And then what?" "Then we'll see." James stood, leaving his son there on the steps, the weight of his choices settling around him like the first frost of winter. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an absolution. But it was a chance one Mark would have to earn. As he walked away, James allowed himself to hope. Want more revenge stories? If you enjoyed the Bitter Coffee Revenge, don't miss out on future tales of betrayal, justice, and cunning payback. Subscribe now to get exclusive stories delivered straight to your inbox, each one packed with twists, tension, and the kind of endings that leave you satisfied. Because everyone deserves a little revenge, and you deserve to read it first.